All right, so welcome to the first episode of the Educator's Journey podcast. Might be the only one, but I hope I can do more of these in the near future. My name is Ben Johnson, and today I'm going to be talking about the Roman Empire, which is a subject that I've always found fairly fascinating. I feel like I know a decent amount about the subject, especially when it comes to how the empire was founded with Emperor Caesar and Augustus and that song and dance. However, I found that recently I was thinking to myself, I don't really know a whole lot about how the empire would fall. So I figured, why not take that question and apply a little bit of research to it. And from what I found, it's a pretty interesting series of events because, as with a lot of historical events, it's not something that's completely it's very multifaceted is what I guess what I'm trying to say. There are a lot of different elements that came together to cause the fall of such a once great empire, which was such a significant event that it left all of Europe in a state of pretty serious decline for a very long time, to the point where we even call the period from, I would wager to say, about 500 CE to around 1300 CE, a period we would typically call the Dark Ages. So I'm rambling a little bit, so I'm going to just get right into my findings. First off, and I kind of knew a little bit about this, but a lot of outside forces in about the 4th and 5th century CE started to encroach a lot on the Roman borders. These included tribes like the Germanic Visigoths and the Vandals. One reason for something like this to happen was around I believe it's the 4th century CE, the Huns invaded from Eurasia and began to encroach upon Eastern Europe and Central Europe, and as they started to invade in those territories, a lot of the Gothic tribes that I mentioned before sought refuge within the empire's borders, and oftentimes they were begrudgingly allowed to stay within the borders, but often they were also treated very, very poorly by the Roman officials, kind of being treated like lesser or second-class citizens. And so, of course, this caused a lot of divide between these foreign folk who were coming in trying to escape from constant warfare, and it would even lead to some certain events that kind of marked significant points in the empire's decline. For example, in the year 410 in the Common Era, the Gothic king Alaric actually revolted against the empire and ended up sacking the city of Rome, I guess as a way of revolting against the empire's mistreatment of his people. And even furthermore, in the year 476, about 65 or 66 years after that, the Germanic leader, I'm going to butcher this guy's name, Odoacer, I hope I'm saying that right, he also ended up revolting and even deposed the current Emperor Romulus Augustulus, and this was actually such a significant event. It was the last time that the post of leadership in the Roman Empire would occur within the country of Italy, which was a major deal because Italy had for centuries been the central point of Rome. And so it's usually this year, 476, that people mark that as the main death blow of the empire. But of course, we're not going to end just there. We still got a lot to cover. Economic issues. This was definitely something I kind of expected to see coming. As we see a lot of foreign tribes encroaching on the empire's borders, there were a lot of cases where the warfare ended up overspending their funds and their coffers, and it ended up putting the empire into great debt. In addition, agricultural production began to wane during these last couple centuries of the empire's existence, which caused a great increase in food prices. And not only that, not only the increase of food prices, but to make up for some of their trade deficits that the empire had, they made the great decision to just print more money, or in this case, I guess, build more money, but with less silver content. So that, of course, as we've seen in other cases of history, such as post-World War I Germany, that caused great amount of inflation. So while prices are increasing, the value of the money is also decreasing, leading to some very negative economic environments within the empire. In addition, high taxation coupled with the inflation also worked to create greater divides between those who were rich and those who were poor. And many rich citizens, even who had the money to get away from these issues, were able to leave the countryside and establish their own feudal lands, which in a way kind of challenged the legitimacy of the empire, since they felt that they were not providing well for them, so they would go and provide for themselves. So that covers the economic issues. Quick little one, slavery. As we know, slavery was something that was rampant in the Roman Empire. However, there came to be an over-reliance on slavery, and usually the empire would get their slaves because of their expansion. They would expand, and as they conquered new lands, they would conquer the people of those lands, and oftentimes would put them into slavery and put them to work. However, at a certain point, when the empire stopped expanding, they started to run out of conquered peoples to put to work. So as this slave class is being drained, their reliance on slavery is not going away. So they become over-reliant on something that they could no longer provide enough of. Another really important area of discussion for the collapse of the Roman Empire, this is something I actually found interesting that I did not know about. Emperor Diocletian actually declared the empire to be split into two territories, a west territory, which was centered in Milan, and an eastern territory known as the Byzantine Empire, with the capital of being Byzantium, or later Constantinople. So while this made it easier for these different split empires to govern themselves, it ultimately created some difficulties in working together as well. It was harder for them to band together and work against their enemies like the encroaching barbarian tribes, and also resulted in a lot of cases where the two halves of the empire would argue over who would receive military aid or resources. In addition, this division was also accentuated by the language divisions. The West continued to speak the traditional Latin. However, the East began to speak Greek. And in addition to that, there were also religious differences. The West subscribed to Roman Christianity towards the end of the empire's existence, whereas the East adopted the Eastern Orthodox branch of Christianity. So there were different cultural divisions that made it different for each side of the empire and made it less likely that they would be able to work in tandem with one another. Additionally, emperors like Emperor Constantine in the east made sure that the cities like Constantinople were well fortified and were able to be defended from any encroaching invaders, whereas the city of Rome was not. And it was because of all these reasons, as well as the location of the Eastern Empire kind of near the Middle East, where they had access to a lot of trade. All of that kind of added up to make the East Empire grow in power, while the Western Empire began to wane in power. The next section I would like to talk about is administration. So, we all know the Roman Empire was an extremely vast empire reaching from the British Isles to the Middle East, which is impressive, but at the same time, having an empire this vast makes it very difficult to provide administration as well as quick communications to all areas of the realm. So, defending the vast frontiers was also a major, costly tax, which ended up taking away funding from infrastructure within the empire. On top of this, it was very difficult to find Roman citizens to join the military at this time. So often officials were hard-pressed to seek out legions of foreign mercenaries from varying foreign tribes to supplement their armies. And the problem with this is a lot of these mercenaries felt little or no loyalty to the empire, and so their loyalty would often shift towards their own interests, and revolts, as we discussed earlier, were common at that time. Last one, I kind of touched on it a little bit, Christianity. In the year 313, in the Common Era, the Emperor Constantine declared the official religion to be Christianity within the empire. And this undermined the power of the Roman emperor and the authority, because prior to this, the Roman emperor was considered a god, was considered divine, and someone who was above all other men. So, adopting this Christian religion, which saw there only being one God, the one God in heaven, this did not fit well in the frame of the Roman Empire's previous system of the divine emperor. Thus, the lack of divinity that became associated with the emperor worked to weaken the authority of the government's power. So overall, those were a lot of different points that I covered. Hopefully, those who are listening, you learned something that you didn't before. I sure know that I did, and that I am glad I looked up the reason for the Roman Empire's fall, because now, if anyone wants to quiz me on that, I'll be prepared. So, that concludes the first episode of the Educator's Journey podcast. Once again, my name is Ben Johnson, and I hope to see y'all later. Have a great day.